Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the America's Founding series, part of the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode, and share this episode with others. Put it on social media. Tag me on it. Gladly give you a follow, because other people can hear the great stories of the great patriots, the forgotten patriots who helped shape our nation. Monday, I laid it out for you. I warned about the dangerous rise of big government, the big government apparatus, the administrative state, how it's grown into a leviathan, swallowing up our rights, dictating our lives, taking control over every single sector. We talked about solutions on Monday, breaking this addiction to federal dollars and returning power to where it belongs. And that's we, the people. As I was preparing for that episode, and this is what drives me nuts, I kept thinking, we were all warned about the rise of the big government apparatus. We were warned about the consolidation of power. The truth is that everything I warned about on Monday, it's not actually new. It's not revolutionary. The federal overreach, the crushing bureaucracy, the loss of state and local control. It was all predicted with terrifying accuracy more than 230 years ago. So today, for our America's Founding series, I want to introduce you to a man who predicted it, who fought against it. He is a forgotten patriot. The man who stood in a sweltering room in Philadelphia, looked James Madison and Alexander Hamilton in the eye and told them exactly how their grand experiment could go wrong and some of the defects that existed within the system they were proposing. We celebrate the Federalists, the building of the Constitution. But that doesn't mean that the Federalists had it all right. It doesn't mean that our Constitution is perfect. And we have to look at the framers. We have to look at the Federalists. We have to look at the Anti-Federalists who took issue with the system that was being created. We have to recognize that both Federalists and Anti-Federalists contributed greatly to our way of life, to our founding. And if we don't acknowledge all the important roles that they played, we are doing a disservice to our country and our history. And this brings me to Luther Martin. I want you to picture it. It's June 1787, Philadelphia. The heat, suffocating. We're talking about a humid, stifling summer air as the participants of this convention are dressed head to toe in heavy clothing. They didn't wear shorts back then. They didn't have fans or air conditioning, and they had to suffer through it. And inside, it's going to get even hotter. You have the Pennsylvania State House, windows being nailed shut to keep the proceedings secret. You could smell the sweat, the parchment, the tension that existed. There are legends in this room. George Washington sitting at the front as the president of the convention. Benjamin Franklin resting his gout-ridden feet. Madison furiously taking notes, trying to jot down every word to keep records for the annals of history. But there is one man that the other delegates are whispering about. And when he stands up to speak, you can practically hear the room groan. They roll their eyes, they shift in their chairs. He's not a polished person. He's very abrasive. He tells you what to think. There's no filter. And he sometimes is a little too fond of the bottle, right? He's also an alcoholic. But he refuses to sit down and shut up. And this is Luther Martin. While history books often leave him in the footnotes, paint him as a villain who tried to stop the Constitution, put an end to the convention, the truth is much more complicated than that, as it usually is. Unfortunately, things tend to be oversimplified today, and there's this lack of critical thinking that exists. Luther Martin was the most unapologetic defender of limited government. Unfortunately, there's very few people that talk about him today, but he had a warning for us. Unlike some of the founding fathers, Luther Martin, he wasn't from aristocratic elites. He didn't come from money. He wasn't a Virginia planter with hundreds of acres of land. He wasn't a wealthy Boston merchant. He was born on a modest farm in New Jersey in 1748. He was a scrapper from day one. He had no connections, no family money. But what he had was a very high intellect. What he had was the gift of oratory, and he would not back down to anyone when it came to compromising his values. Now, he is going to work his way into the College of New Jersey. We now call that college Princeton University, and he's going to graduate top of his class, top honors. He moves to Maryland, becomes a school teacher, eventually a lawyer. As a lawyer, he was a force of nature. They say he had a photographic memory. He could recite entire pages of legal text without even looking. In the courtroom, he was known for wearing down his opponents with just sheer volume and intensity of his words. He didn't just want to win. He wanted to dismantle the other side's argument brick by brick. And there's something that's beautiful about that. I think we've lost that in today's debate. Rather than dismantle the other side's argument, we just try and make it as if we're right. But he wanted to show the weaknesses that existed in people's arguments. And he was so effective that he was appointed Maryland's Attorney General in his early 30s. And that is an incredibly young age, even though for that time, for such a powerful position. But it fit him. See, Luther Martin had a very specific view of law. He didn't believe that law was there to give the government power. He believed that law existed to actually restrain government power. And that's a key distinction, because to Martin, the idea of government was a necessary evil. He understood that you had to have a government in order to have order in a society. It was like a guard dog. You want it to protect your house, but you never, ever let it off the leash. Now, before we get to the Constitution, you have to understand his credentials. He wasn't some sort of loyalist. He didn't have any sympathies for the British, and he wasn't a coward. When the drumbeat of revolution started, Martin was a radical. He was calling for independence, while many in Maryland, the elites of Maryland, was still hoping to patch things up with King George. And so Martin is going to risk everything for the cause. He pushed Maryland toward independence despite massive internal division in the Maryland leadership. Why did he do this? Well, simple. He believed that power had to remain close to the people. He believed that a farmer in Maryland should not be ruled by a bureaucrat across the Atlantic Ocean in London. And this is the key to understanding what happens next, because for Luther Martin, the revolution wasn't just about swapping a British king for an American president. It was about decentralization of power, that a government far away, a central power far away, was going to be notorious. It would always abuse its power eventually. Luther Martin wanted to ensure that communities governed themselves, not some big centralized government apparatus. He built a reputation as the defender of the ordinary citizen against the state. So when 1787 rolls around, Maryland sends him to Philadelphia for the Constitutional Convention. And Martin packs his bags, thinking he's going to go there. They're going to fix the Articles of Confederation. He'll go home. He thinks he's going there to preserve the rights of the states. He has no idea that the Articles are essentially dead. They're beyond revival. So Martin arrives at Philadelphia. He gets there a little bit late. The convention already started. He walks in expecting a debate about trade routes and taxes and borders. Instead, he finds James Madison and the Virginia delegation pushing a plan to scrap the government entirely and replace it with this massive centralized national system. Martin looks around the room. What are you guys crazy? We just fought a war against this. He believes that they're going to try and revive the British system, the unitary system, and go with a lighter version of it on American soil. Says, no. Right then and there, he's going to take a stand. His pushback against the proposals are going to become legendary. And we need to take a quick commercial break. But when we get back, I'm going to tell you about the 4-hour speech that nearly broke the convention and the eerily accurate predictions Martin made about the government we live under today. So everyone, hang tight, and we'll be right back. Are you ready to move easily and independently without pain and stiffness holding you back? Do you want to look in the mirror and see a hydrated glow instead of more fine lines and wrinkles? Well, discover Native Path Collagen, made with only type 1 and 3 collagen fibers. These are the two most important types that make up 90% of the collagen found in your cartilage, bones, skin, hair, nails, and gut. They provide maximum benefits. And Native Path Collagen is a single ingredient formula with no fillers, additives, or artificial sweeteners. Plus, it's third-party tested for heavy metals, ensuring purity and safety. Completely flavorless, Native Path Collagen can be added to anything: coffee, smoothies, oatmeal, you name it. It doesn't clump, it absorbs fast thanks to its peptide formula. And the best part, Native Path offers amazing bundle deals at a fraction of the price of other brands. With over 4 million jars sold, 1 million happy customers, 8,000 5-star reviews, and a 365-day no-risk guarantee, Native Path is a brand you could trust. They offer an 800 number for any questions you may have, and then you'll speak to a real person who's there to help. Visit getnativepath.com/PAS and start your transformation today. That's getnativepath.com/PAS. Welcome back to the America's Founding Series. Now, if you're enjoying the story of Luther Martin, a story you probably never even heard before, give this forgotten patriot his due and share this episode with others. Many of the framers, both Federalists and Anti-Federalists, warned about big government and the apparatus that we're living under today. And so we need to go back to the hot, stifling room in Philadelphia, June 1787. Federalists like Madison and Hamilton, they're winning the argument. They're pushing the Virginia plan, which is going to create a very powerful central government with the authority to veto state laws, essentially. You have small states panicking. I mean, they feel the wall's closing in. But most of them are too polite or too intimidated to make a scene. However, this wasn't Luther Martin's style. He'll make a scene. He didn't really care. And on June 27, Martin takes to the floor. He doesn't just speak. He unleashes for nearly 2 days, speaking for hours at a time. Luther Martin holds the floor. It's one of the longest, fiercest, most exhausting speeches in the history of the Constitutional Convention. And you have to picture this scene. He has got to be sweating all over the place, his voice booming, his hair probably a mess. Other delegates exhausted. Madison actually wrote in his notes that Martin was diffuse and tiresome. They are literally rolling their eyes, they're sighing, they're wishing that he would just sit down and shut up. But he won't, because he sees something that they don't. And he blasts the Virginia plan. He warns them. You have to listen to this closely. He warns them. 1787, that a consolidated national government will inevitably swallow up the states. He predicts that if you give the federal government the power to tax individuals directly, they're never going to stop taxing them. He warns that the general welfare clause will be abused to justify any federal action the government wants to take. He looks at this idea of the presidency and says, this executive that you're creating, the one that's going to have command over the army, the one that has the power of appointments, it's going to create a monarchy in all but title, especially if the proposed Congress failed to do its job of providing strict oversight. So he argued that the further the government is removed from the people, the more layers of bureaucracy you put between the voter and the decision makers, the more corrupt the system is going to become. Does that sound familiar to all you out there? Because he did warn of a federal dominance where the states become nothing more than administrative districts, begging for the scraps from the national capital to fill their budgets. And isn't that exactly what has happened, where states have become reliant? He wasn't speaking to hear his own voice. He was speaking because he was terrified. He knew that this would eventually happen. And then the breaking point. Summer drags on. Martin realizes that he's unlikely to prevail, as those at the Constitutional Convention made clear that they had to create a more powerful central government than what existed under the Articles of Confederation. However, it doesn't mean that Martin wasn't successful. He certainly was, because his relentless obstruction forced the big states to blink. The Virginia plan gets rejected. This is going to pave the way for the Great Compromise and the system of federalism, a system that would have a Senate where every state would have equal representation regardless of their size, where you will have two levels of government. Neither level would be created by the other, and both would operate independently of each other. Initially, Martin would support the Great Compromise. He was willing to give it a shot because he saw it as a far better alternative to the Virginia plan, and he didn't want to see the Constitutional Convention fail. He stated that he would, quote, make trial of the plan as a way to keep the convention from collapsing. He understood that if the convention failed, it's game over for our experiment. It's over before it even really begins. But he and many of the other delegates would continue to fight. And it really got heated between him and James Wilson, who I covered on a previous episode of America's Founding Series. Now, Luther Martin's ultimately going to walk out, and he expressed a willingness to support the compromise, but he believed ultimately it lacked essential checks on states' rights, and it also lacked a Bill of Rights. He argued that without a Bill of Rights, the new government would be a many-headed leviathan, an ungovernable monster. To him, the system lacked sufficient checks and balances, sufficient protections for life, liberty, and prosperity in the pursuit of happiness, and he believed that fraud and oppression would be rampant. Ultimately, he's going to walk out on the Constitutional Convention. He's not going to sign on to the compromise. And most Anti-Federalists who opposed the plan, they did fight it later during ratification. They did present their series of arguments in the articles, wrote pamphlets from the safety of their homes explaining why they didn't support it. Luther Martin's going to leave Philadelphia before the signing takes place. This creates a firestorm in Maryland. Maryland legislature refuses to pay his expenses. He's being mocked in the press. He's called an obstructionist. But he returns to Maryland with his head held high. He expresses the sentiment that he would rather be a free citizen in a small republic than a subject in a massive empire. When we hear this idea of obstructionism today, that's supposed to happen in the United States. Now, ultimately, he did lose the battle. The Constitution was signed, the new government was formed, but just a few years later, the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, was adopted. And Martin didn't just retire quietly into the night. He went back to practicing law. As a matter of fact, interestingly, despite his hatred of federal power, he became known as the federal bulldog in the courtroom, not because he supported the party, but because he was so tenacious. His most famous moment came years later, 1807. He joined the defense team for Aaron Burr, the former vice president accused of treason by Thomas Jefferson. Now think about the irony in this. Luther Martin, the man who hated centralized power, is defending Aaron Burr against Thomas Jefferson, the president who claimed to represent the common man, but was using the full weight of the federal government to crush a political enemy. Martin saw the Burr trial as government overreach. He stood up in court, argued that even a man as hated as Aaron Burr deserved his due process. He argued that the president could not simply declare someone a traitor. He had to be proven a traitor. And he won. Aaron Burr was acquitted, whether rightly or wrongly. To Martin, it was a triumph for the rule of law. But his personal life did unravel because he was a tragic figure in many ways. And this speaks to the flaws of all of us, right? And we constantly put these founding fathers on pedestals, but they were human beings. You look at someone like Luther Martin. He struggled with alcoholism for most of his life. It was his demon. He was also very stubborn. He was rude, managed money poorly. He died in 1826, same year as Jefferson and Adams, but they died as celebrated founders of this country, the celebrated framers of the country. Martin died largely in debt, physically broken. So why do I tell his story today? Why spend 20 minutes on a man who, by all historical accounts, lost the argument and died in relative obscurity? Well, it's simple. Because when we look around at America today, we have to admit Luther Martin was right. Revisit that image of him in the stifling heat of Philadelphia. He warned that the federal bureaucracy would expand until it choked the states. That is exactly what has happened. He warned that national authority eclipsed local communities. That has happened. He warned that policymaking would drift so far from the ordinary citizen that we would feel like spectators in our own republic. Isn't that exactly how so many people feel today? That's why so many people don't go out and vote. Oh, my vote doesn't matter. My vote doesn't mean anything. Many feel like we are nothing more than spectators. Many feel that public servants have forgotten that they exist to serve the public rather than the public exists to serve them. See, Luther Martin teaches us a hard lesson. He teaches us that liberty often depends on the people who are willing to be annoying, the people who are willing to be unpopular and say unpopular things. People who are willing to stand up in a room full of powerful people and say, you are wrong. We always remember the Madisons, the Hamiltons, the Washingtons, and we should. They built the ship. They were great patriots. But Luther Martin, he should be celebrated as well. He was the man pointing at the iceberg ahead, saying, you better be careful here. And his life proves that dissent is not disloyalty. In fact, dissent is the heartbeat of our nation, the heartbeat of a free republic. So as we look for solutions to the many problems we face, as we try to pull power back from Washington, restore it to the states and the individuals, as I discussed on Monday, we should take inspiration from this bulldog. Never be afraid to be the lone voice in the room. Never be afraid to ask questions. Never be afraid to call out authority. Never be afraid to criticize the government. And never ever assume that the government's going to restrain itself, because it won't unless you force it to. On Monday, I got a great episode lined up because too often, as long as it's our team in power, we give it a pass. But that's not the way it should be. And the legacy of Luther Martin shows that. The forgotten patriot who warned us. It's about time that we start listening to those warnings. Now, I hope you enjoyed this look into our history. If you want to dive deep, I encourage you, go out and read Martin's letters, The Genuine Information. That's what it's called. It details his arguments at the convention. It reads like prophecy. Check it out. And don't forget to rate and review this podcast, especially on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Share the P.A.S. report with others. It helps grow the audience. But more importantly, it helps more people realize how high the stakes are. It informs more people. Remember what John Adams once said, liberty once lost is lost forever. Keep that in mind.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.